These books just didn't give what I wanted to be gave. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife, and today I am taking you through my most disappointing reads across 2024. You can't always have a win, and across 114 books, there's bound to be something that just didn't work for you. Whether it was because of the writing, whether it was because of characters, whether it was because of storylines, whatever the reason is, these books just didn't light on fire for me. First one on the list is one that I read all the way back in January, and that is After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. For some really serendipitous reason, for a couple of years, one of the first books that I've read has been one of the Taylor Jenkins Reid backlists, and unfortunately, this has been the weakest of the pot so far. This is about Lauren and Ryan, who've been together since they were teenagers, and they have been married for a couple of years, but cracks are really starting to show in their relationship. They don't really have a lot of respect for one another, they don't really talk to each other in a way that you would think a loving married couple should. So they decide to go on a break. For an entire calendar year, Lauren and Ryan are going to live separately to one another. They are not going to have any contact with one another. They're going to live completely separate lives. And by the end of this calendar year, they're going to come back and decide if they want to continue this break and get divorced or get back together and give it another try. And this is where everything fell apart for me, because I truly do not think that Lauren and Ryan should be together at all. The way that they spoke to one another, the way that they treated one another, even with the most banal things, was so hurtful and so horrible to read that I couldn't imagine coming back to a situation like that. There were a couple of really good discussions in here, such as about Thumper, their dog that they share. What were they going to do about sharing custody of Thumper? Neither of them wanted to actually give Thumper up, but they were going to have a couple of logistical problems trying to get Thumper to everyone's house. So I thought that the solution that they came up with that was really good, but there was a whole lot of this book that I just found myself shaking my head or putting my head in my arms and thinking, I do not see these two people getting back together. There was a lot of actions across this book as well that I really didn't agree with. It turns out that Lauren and Ryan had been kind of cyber stalking each other for a lot of the year. They still had each other's email passwords, they still had each other's Facebook logins. So they were kind of checking in on what their spouse was doing over the year. If they were going out, if they were on a trip, if they were going to see people, what they were doing, who they were going with, where they were going. And I felt like this was a little bit too far. If you are completely separating yourself from a person for a year, you need to really cut the strings. You need to completely remove them from your life, digitally as well as physically. And I feel like that just wasn't done. Spoiler alert, but by the end of the book, Lauren and Ryan do give their relationship another try. I really don't think that they should have. And they really should have sat down and had a discussion about the issues that were bringing them to this trial separation in the first place. There was never a moment where they sat down and confronted any of those problems or any of the things that had come up completely head on. They just headed back together. And that just did not work for me. Now, I know that this is just a little blip for Taylor Jenkins Reid because every other book of hers that I've read, I have absolutely loved it. Evelyn Hugo is one of my all-time favorite books of all time. I really loved Maybe in Another Life because I loved the kind of sliding doors situation that was going on there. But I just didn't really love this one. Next one on the list is a hockey romance. Myself and my friend Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading put together a vlog back in February or so. We read 3 different hockey romances and we just wanted to figure out if that was a kind of a subgenre that was for us. Both of us had a rather similar experience with Breakaway by Grace Riley. This is actually the second in a series, and I didn't like this book so much that I immediately unhauled First Down, which is the first in the series. This is about Penny and Cooper. Cooper is one of the college's star hockey players, and Penny is the coach's daughter. And Penny feels a little bit kind of off limits to Cooper just because of her connection with the coach. But Penny and Cooper set eyes on one another, and they're instantly drawn to one another. Penny has got this kind of sex bucket list that she wants to work on, and Cooper is exactly the right person that is going to help her out. So they set up a kind of a friends with benefits system, and that is basically the entire plot of this book. There is absolutely nothing else that happens in here. It is just straight up fucking. And look, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love a smut book. I absolutely love a book that has steamy scenes, but I don't love a book that is only sex. I do like to have some character development. I do like to have some plot that's happening. I do like to have things that actually happen in this book. And there was just none of that. There were so many scenes in here that were super cringy. There were so many scenes in here that I physically recoiled while I was reading them. And that's not a feeling that you're supposed to have while you're reading a sexy book. Something that really stood out to me though is that when Penny and Cooper see an orange cat across the road and they decide that they want to adopt this cat, Penny's immediate reaction is that this must be a girl cat. I am a cat person. I absolutely adore cats. As an adult, I've always wanted to have my own cat running around the place, and I grew up with cats in the home. So I know that about 95 to 98% of the orange cats that you see running around are male. It is very infrequent and rare to see a female orange cat. So that really took me out of the book in a really weird and specific way. This book was just too long for what it was. There was absolutely no plot development, and I just didn't believe in either of the characters, and I didn't particularly want to go back to it any time that I was reading it, so it just didn't hit the mark for me. A really big disappointment for me in 2024 is the end of a series that I was really looking forward to, and I had really hoped for better for the main character here, and that was Aisling Ever After by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. It is the last book of the Aisling series, and after what had happened in the end of book 4, I was really hoping that this book would go a different direction than it actually did. It follows Aisling, who is at the end of book 4 living in New York and has just opened her front door to see her ex-boyfriend John standing out there. This is where I really hoped things had gone in a different direction. Aisling and John have had their ups and downs. They've been together since they were about 21. Aisling is now in her 30s, and in the first book, they actually had an argument and a really big break about Aisling wanting to get married and John just not being there. I feel like when you've been together for about 7 years, having a conversation about your future and about marriage plans and about children is something that you should expect happening. Aisling and John, who have not been together since the first book, go on their separate ways. John actually moves to Dubai and Aisling moves to New York. And when John and Aisling get back together, that is when I should have put the book down. I really didn't want to see Aisling take several steps back in all of the growth that we had seen from her. The Aisling in the first book would never have moved to New York, work in a brand new company, working in a brand new environment, living in a brand new culture, getting to know new people. And I just felt like this was holding her back so far from the Aisling that I had now come to know and love. Aisling and John get back together. They decide to both move back to Ballygobbard to set up a life together once again, and I really didn't enjoy this. I felt like this was such a step backwards, and Aisling really deserved more out of this book. There were a couple of smaller things in this book that just really didn't work for me either. For example, Sarah and Emer kept saying that the time difference between Ireland and New York was 7 hours. I have a lot of friends who live on the east coast of the USA, so I know instinctively that the time difference between Ireland and New York is actually 5 hours. 7 hours is probably the flight time between Dublin and New York. Another thing that kind of annoyed me is that when Aisling comes home, surprising everybody for Christmas, the first place that she goes isn't her family home. If I went home as a surprise to my parents and I went first to the pub, my mother would disown me. I'd never speak to the woman again. And I really think that Aisling should have just gone home, been with her family for a little bit, and then said, okay, now that I have seen you guys and now that we all know I'm here and we've caught up, I'm going to go down and talk to friends of mine. I really think that that was done in such a backwards way. One of the biggest things that really annoy me about this book, though, is a discussion that another couple has about wanting to have children. Sive, who's one of Aisling's best friends, is in a relationship with Dom, who is the frontman of a really big successful rock band. And both of them have had a discussion about wanting children. Sive really wants to be a mother. Dom does not see children in his future. And that is when they should have said, okay, we want different things, we need to split. And they did for about 5 pages. And then they get back together and Dom decides, I would rather have you and a child that I don't want rather than not have kids, but also not have you. I hate that idea. I hate the idea that you can mold a woman's mind into wanting to have children just because it is what you want to do. And I really hate the narrative that is trying to diminish the wants of people who are child-free by choice. I absolutely hated reading that book. I am so disappointed that this is the note that Aisling ended on. I really hoped for better from this one. Another book by an Irish author that disappointed me, and one that I actually DNF'd about 40% or so of the way through, is The Woman That Stole My Life by Marian Keyes. Something that really annoyed me is that we never actually met the woman who stole Stella's life. This titular character never appeared in the 40 or so percent of the book that I'd been reading. And if we hadn't met her by then, she clearly wasn't such a big deal. This book is about Stella, who, before the events of this book, was suffering from Guillain-Barré syndrome. This is also known as locked-in syndrome. So for about a month, she was basically confined to a bed in hospital, completely paralysed except for the ability to blink. A neurologist from the US named Manox is flown into Ireland to try and bring Stella back to the life and the body that she used to have. And as the book begins, Stella and Manox are on a trip in the US to promote a book that Stella has written about her experiences with Guillain-Barré syndrome. It was a really interesting concept, but it just fell completely flat for me. I found all of the characters in this book completely insufferable. Stella was kind of okay, but her ex-husband Ryan was a complete dose. He had this really big obsession with karma and with karmic energy and everybody getting exactly what it was that they deserved. Their two sons were completely insufferable. They were awful people. And when it looked like Stella and Manox were going to get into a relationship with kind of Stockholm Syndrome situation, that's when I gave up on this book. I really didn't want to read that kind of a narrative. I don't know if the woman who stole Stella's life is going to turn up in the 60 or so percent of the book that I wasn't reading, but I don't particularly care to find out. I was also really disappointed by Love Story by Lindsay Kelk, and this was really upsetting for me because this is the second book in a row by Lindsay Kelk that just hasn't worked for me. This is following Sophie, who comes from a really big publishing family, but she has kind of gone out of the ordinary for their family situation and is working as a teacher. She's on her way back to her parents' house for her father's 60th birthday, and disaster has struck because she has left her laptop on the train. This is a huge problem because on that laptop is the manuscript of her next novel. In her social circle, Sophie is known just as Sophie, but to the wider community, Sophie is actually Esty Cox. Esty is one of the world's biggest romance and erotica novelists, and she has a huge bestseller that is taking the New York Times bestseller list by storm. But nobody knows Esty's identity. Sophie is also joined on this experience by Joe, who is working for her father's publishing house as a marketing director, and he has made it his job to find out who Esty Cox really is. He just doesn't know that Esty is about 5 foot away from him at any given time. There were a lot of things that I really didn't enjoy about this book. One thing is that I think this is going to date itself so quickly. There are so many references in this book to BookTok, to Instagram, to YouTube, to influencers, to authors, to books, to publishing. And I just think that that is going to date it so quickly, but also because they were so frequently done, it felt really unnatural and clunky. It felt like every page there was some kind of a reference that you had to stumble through, and I think that that was just a little bit too much. I also really disliked the character of Charlotte, who is Sophie's younger sister. It felt like she was brought up with a real silver spoon in her mouth, where Sophie is the basically Cinderella sister. Charlotte was given everything that she wanted, including and up to the payment for a kind of a bookshop that she's going to rent out in the town and is going to set up as a romance bookshop. And she's also kind of on the Who is Esty Cox train. And there were so many things in this book that I just really didn't enjoy about Charlotte. For example, Charlotte puts her eyes on her sister's handbag that Sophie had actually bought when her first book bought out. And Charlotte decides immediately, I do not care who I have to murder. That bag is going to be mine. It's not even real anyway, it doesn't matter. This entitlement was such a souring point for the entire story. I did make my way through this one, and I don't know how I'm going to go with Lindsay Kelk in the future. For a really long time, she was one of my favourite authors, and I would instantly buy anything that she'd ever written. But I feel like over the last few years or so, Lindsay Kelk's books just haven't been working for me in the way that they did before. Maybe I just need something that's going to be that one little magical touch, or maybe I just need to go into them with a completely different mindset. Another author whose most recent release disappointed me this year was a novel love story by Ashley Poston. I absolutely adored The 7-Year Slip. It made me so emotional, so I had really high hopes for a novel love story because the story of it sounded so interesting. It's about Eileen, whose car breaks down when she is on her way to a kind of a comic con based around her absolute favourite book series. The author of the series has passed away, and the last book of it is just due to come out. But Eileen is on her way to meet some of her friends who she has met through like Discords and online channels talking about this book. And when her car breaks down, she discovers that she is in the world of Eloratan. This is where the book was set, and she is seeing all of the characters that she has known and loved just walking around and living their everyday lives. Somebody else new in the town is Anders. He is not one of the characters in the book, and Eileen and he try and figure out how it is that they have gotten caught up in all of the magic of this world. And did you know that Anders has mint green eyes? It is mentioned maybe once or twice or 7,000 times in this book, and I have got green eyes myself. I feel like saying that so many times is doing people with green eyes a disservice, but also, I don't know if you've ever seen the color mint green. That is not a natural eye color for somebody to have. I feel like the concept of this book was great, but the execution of it just really didn't work for me. There were so many references to this book series that was happening that Eileen was in love with, and that felt really alienating. I cannot ever read this book. It is completely fictional, and there is never going to be any kind of reference to it in any kind of media that I can pick up. So when there was so much being brought up about it, and when there was so much being said about it, I just felt like this is a book that I am being excluded from in a way. There is one sex scene in this book, and it is a fade to black. And I don't need to have a sex scene to enjoy books. I don't need it to be smutty for me to enjoy it. But I just felt like there was no payoff for that one. It just disappeared, and we never had any mention to it again. When we find out as well the reason why Anders is in the world of Eloratan, it infuriated me so much. There was absolutely no reason for that to have been the reason that Anders was there in the first place. And I found myself really not wanting to finish this book. I found myself not even wanting to pick it up while I was reading it. And that is never a good sign. If there is a book that I am enjoying, I am always rushing off my feet to go and pick it back up. But if I am plodding through it and I'm not looking forward to coming back to it, it's just never a good sign. An author who is appearing for a second time on this list is Marian Keyes. I really did not like My Favorite Mistake this year. It was a follow-up to Again Rachel and the Walsh Sister series, which I have absolutely loved. Again Rachel really hit me because of how well it was written and because of how well it tackled some really difficult topics that really needed to be discussed. And there are some topics in My Favorite Mistake that, again, are a little bit difficult to talk about, but also really need to be discussed, such as bereavement, such as going through a second relationship after this bereavement, and also going through the menopause. I, for example, did not know that you can kind of stave the menopause off for a little bit. If you go on hormone replacement therapy, it will kind of buy you a little bit more time. But there's only so long that you can do that to your body, and sometimes you just have to let what happens naturally happen. This book is about Anna, who is the second to youngest of the Walsh sisters, and she has come back to Ireland after about 15 or so years living in New York. She has just broken up with her boyfriend, and they have decided to go their completely separate ways. She has come back to Ireland, and she feels like the shine is starting to wear off already. She's only been here for a couple of weeks, but she feels like people just aren't as excited to see her as she was hoping and expecting that they would be. And as somebody who has emigrated from Ireland and who comes back now and then, I definitely get what she means. You almost expect that there's going to be like a brass band and a red carpet arrival for you when you get into the arrivals hall, and that just doesn't happen. People go on with their lives. People kind of bring you back into their lives and bring you back into their families, but things just have to go on for people. There were a couple of things that I did enjoy about this book. I did really enjoy the depiction of going through the menopause and of going through hormone replacement therapy. There's also a really nice paragraph where Anna talks about her husband Aidan, who passed away in a car crash about 10 or so years ago, in which Anna was also involved, and she has a scar on her face that she is still carrying to this day. I thought that the way she spoke about Aidan and the way that she talks about how she wishes she was still here and the life that they could have had together was so wonderful and heartbreaking, but it was so nice to read it at the same time. And it was also just really nice to see Anna picking her life back up and getting back out there, meeting new people, going for new jobs. That said, there was a lot that just didn't work for me. I really did not like Anna's treatment of Joey, who is a guy that she starts seeing when she comes back to Ireland and she has met through this new job that she's gotten when she's back there. I found there were a couple of things that she had done in the past to him because they had a bit of a history before she even moved to New York. Some of the things that she had done to him were so completely inexcusable. Some of the ways that she had treated him were inexcusable. Just because Joey had a kind of a reputation as a guy around town and as a guy who has more notches on his bedpost than you have had pairs of socks. I just thought that her treatment of him was so horrible. I never wanted the two of them to particularly end up back together. There are also so many characters in this book, and I really think it could have benefited from the same kind of dramatis personae or family tree that you had at the beginning of Again, Rachel. I just feel like there were so many people that were introduced time and time and time again. It felt like almost every 5 chapters I was meeting somebody new that now I have to look into what they do. Do I have to start caring about this person? Do I have to start wondering what impact they're going to have in the story? There was just so many people that I lost track of half of them. And the other half of them, I just kind of didn't care what they were doing. Marian has been kind of up and down for me in the last while. There are some books of hers that I will cherish forever and ever. They're going to be favorite books of mine forever. There are some that just didn't work for me. So let's see what happens with her next book. I'm going to go into it with very mid expectations. I'm just going to let the road take me where it takes me, and let's see what goes on. Next up are 2 books by the same author that I'm going to talk about together because my problems with both books were relatively similar, and that was The Pumpkin Spice Cafe and The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore. These books tried too hard to be Gilmore Girls. They tried too hard to be Stars Hollow, and you can tell this because the author's pen name is absolutely Gilmore Girls coded, but I think they tried to make Dream Hollow a little bit too Stars Hollow, and it just never worked for me. There's also some really weird mysteries that are running throughout the entire book, and I didn't feel like they needed them. I know that The Pumpkin Spice Cafe was actually wrongly marketed as a thriller when it first came out, and a lot of people had picked it up with that kind of intention in mind, to say that they were going to have this kind of a cozy mystery that was supposed to be solved. And it turned out that actually this is just a straight up romance with a little bit of a kind of a, oh, what's going on here in the background. I enjoyed The Pumpkin Spice Cafe a little bit more than I did The Cinnamon Bookstore, but only a very slight amount. The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore I felt was also mismarketed because the cover will make you think that this is an autumnal book set in a kind of like an autumn Thanksgiving-y type stuff. It's mainly set around August and the end of summer, which just didn't work for me when you combine it with the cover that it was and with the kind of situation that was going on. The Cinnamon Bun Bookstore also had way too many sex scenes for a book that was supposed to be this cozy, and that just didn't mash up well for me at all. I don't think that this is a series that I'm going to go back to. This is not an author that I'm going to revisit. This one just really didn't do anything for me. Lastly, we come to my final DNF of the year, and that was Make the Season Bright by Ashley Herring Blake. I was so excited about this one because I've absolutely loved the Bright Fall trilogy, so I have really high expectations for it, and I think those expectations plummeted as soon as I started reading it. This book is about Charlotte and Brighton. Brighton left Charlotte at the altar about 5 years ago. The two of them have completely gone their separate ways until one Christmas. Sloane, who is one of Charlotte's best friends and fellow musicians, and Adele, who is Brighton's best friend, are siblings, and they bring Charlotte and Brighton back together as they're going to bring some of their friends home for Christmas to celebrate. And this is where everything fell apart for me. I don't love second chance romances anyway, but there was never a moment in this book where I was hoping that Charlotte and Brighton would get back together. They really needed to sit down and have a discussion about what happened between the two of them 5 years ago. Instead, Charlotte and Brighton decided to pretend that they had never met each other, to pretend that they hadn't had this huge history between one another. And this really didn't work. It went to the huge detriment of the entire book. There are also a lot of flashbacks in this book to when Charlotte and Brighton had known each other as children, them growing up together, them going to school, them getting together in the first place, and these weren't well laid out for me. They were really disjointed, and it took away from the flow of the book for me because I felt a lot of the time I was trying to figure out when it was that we were in the narrative, if we were in the present day or if we were back in time. And I shouldn't have to spend so much of a book deciding when it is that I'm talking about. Charlotte and Brighton probably get back together by the end of this book. I DNF'd it at about 100 or so pages, but I don't think they're going to last about 5 minutes after this book has finished. There's so much miscommunication between the two of them. They have no interest in tackling problems head on with one another, and I just don't see their relationship going anywhere after it's finished. Those are the books that in 2024 just didn't work for me while I was reading. What book just didn't work for you in 2024, or what book let you down a little bit? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me a thumbs down emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.